What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Bassin Basics. Today we're going to be talking about crankbaits, more specifically talking about square bills and diving into what makes a square bill, rod reel, line, all that good stuff, how to select what we're trying to imitate, all that good stuff before we take them to the pool and show you exactly what we're looking at with underwater footage and exactly what I'm talking about from here to the pool and all that good stuff. So before we jump into all the intricate, crazy details. What is square bill crankbaits? We're gonna have some beginner stuff for some of you anglers that are literally just starting to bass fish. To some of the anglers, obviously some advanced stuff. So don't take this as just a basics course, but it's definitely got a little bit of everything in between. First thing you're gonna talk about is the fact what makes a crankbait a square bill. First thing is literally it's because it's a square lipped crankbait, square bill. Okay, I'll show you what's not a square bill. This one right here, this is a DT6. It's more like a coffin bill. It's more rounded. This is a square lip crankbait. Square bill, typically a traditional square bill. I want to say the original might be a Big O or old school Bagley from back in the day. Maybe Bagley B2, B1, stuff like that. Now, obviously, over the years, things have transitioned to different profiles, different baits. And they've become more subtle and subtle with fishing pressure getting, a little bit higher and higher and figuring out ways that we can target these fish. Typically, a square bill is not, there are deeper diving square bills. Like a deep diving square bill would run like 7 feet, 6 feet. That'd be crazy deep, right? But overall, like you don't see a square lip crankbait that's really like a popular crankbait. Most of the time you're targeting that 2 to 5 foot zone. Maximum maybe 6 is really what you're looking at, So I've selected some crankbaits and some square bills that I throw on a regular basis. They all have something a little bit different about them. And sort of what I'm looking for when I'm throwing a square bill. And so the first thing, the square lip crankbaits and square bill crankbaits really started and got a lot of publicity around fishing around cover. Because of that square bill, they deflect off of wood and rock and cover. They're almost, if you can understand, this is almost like your four-wheeler of the crankbait world. This is the one that you're going to throw in the thicker stuff. This is the one that's going to he has a wider bill, so he's going to be able to deflect off of that cover without getting to the hooks. You imagine a crankbait runs like that. He nose down, right? So the bigger the bill, the more he deflects off of that cover, and he hides, basically protecting those hooks, but also triggering the strikes from the bass. So that's sort of how I always have looked at it. Now, I'm an OG square biller. Straight up, I am. I'm one of those guys that I cranked starting off in Indiana. I parallel banks. I fished I fished a lot of tournaments up on Morris and Geist and all those places and cranked riprap and fished wood with a crankbait. And it's really, I'm not going to say it's lost, but it is a little bit of a lost art. I'm going to be honest with you. There's something about a crankbait that catches big fish and that speed and also deflecting off of cover. It's just something that's such a unique presentation that you can't really imitate that with any other lure out there. So there's always going to be a time and place for crankbaits in the sport. And it's something that if as a young angler or a starting angler or even an advanced angler, crankbaits will never be replaced. They're just baits that you just have to learn how to fish because they're so efficient in covering water and catching big fish. So that being said, I have a couple different square bills here. I'm gonna name them by name first. First off, this is a square bill that my good buddy Ott Defoe designed from Rapala, the OG Rocco. And this is that more in-between size, like the number 5 size. I have a little bit OG Rocco, I think it's 6, but he's a bigger Rocco. So he's more of like that, a little bit bigger profile. I recommend that sort of in-between, almost like an old school, like sort of in-between size profile, like a 1.5 profile, stuff like that. That is what I'm sort of throwing here. I think it's a good standard size. You're going to throw it on casting gear or bait casters. You can throw it on a spinning rod, but on casting gear, you're going to be able to throw that fairly well. And it just, it gets bites and it gets down there in that depth zone that I'm really looking for. As far as what I'm trying to imitate, okay, there's a lot of different colors here. I would say keep it very simple, okay? You don't have to go crazy. Now, yes, is there some colors that you might want to add? Right now, it's not springtime, but if it was springtime, I would make sure to have a red crankbait up here in this arsenal. Reds are always great. These brown craws like this are better if the watercolor is a little bit, it's stained but not muddy. I throw red when it's more muddier color or water, a muddy color. And when I say muddy, it's like a foot or less, or a foot and a half or less. Stain is 2 feet, 2.5 feet. I'm going to throw that brown crawl, more natural presentation, more brown, natural color. Even like this is a root beer crawl. Same thing, 2 feet, 2.5. I can get away with a little bit more because he's real natural, really nice presentation. These guys right here, if I want more chartreuse, this is more of a crawl pattern, but it also can be double over as a bluegill because it's got a green back. It's like a root beer chartreuse. It's one of my favorite colors from like back in the day. Orange belly, chartreuse side, green back. That's going to be a good color that I'm going to be throwing for sure in the spring. But also, don't forget to throw it in the fall and in the summertime when it's dirtier water and they're imitating a bluegill. That's one of my favorite colors as well. So there's colors here, citrus shad. I mean, citrus shad's a great color for stained water. Your traditional black back and chartreuse, anytime the water's stained to muddy, I mean, foot and a half visibility to dark mud, it's going to work. So it's one of my favorite colors. And then, of course, the natural side of this, the cleaner water, more silvers, this is a green gizzard, or a translucent color. This is a speed trap, Luregen speed trap, but now is being brought into storm. So that is more translucent colors are better for the cleaner water. So that's sort of an overview on the color selection side of things. That's definitely, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the bills and sort of like how I select a crankbait. So let's sort of dive into more of the traditional square bill from like back in the day is what I would call this. And this is more of a traditional square bill. This is a DT Fat 3. They're still around, harder to get. I've been throwing these since, I mean, I've had them a long time. These baits were baits that I bought prior to even starting to fish professionally. But this is a fatter bait. So traditional square bills back in the day were very buoyant. They had very wide lips like this one has right here. And so they deflect up. These are really good cover crankbaits, deflecting off a cover really well, throwing in the hearts of the cover. This is going to be your four-wheeler of your square bills, if you will. So this is the one that I'm going to be throwing in the heavy cover, but with the wider bill, he has more hard-hitting action, so he's going to have a lot more of an erratic action. But he's typically, for me, is not going to be the square bill that I'm going to throw in cleaner water or under pressured situations because I don't want that wider wobbling crankbait. I want more of a, I want a little bit more of a more natural, if you will, more natural wobble. But this is a great crankbait for muddy water, stained water, when you need more thump. A fatter profile like the old school. This is more along those lines of like an old school Bagley B2, or this is a DT Fat 3, a little bit, more of like a bite-sized profile, which is going to work for a lot of different sized fish, from spotted bass, largemouth, smallmouth, whatever, right? It just catches fish, but in stained water or under pressure, or under places where the fish aren't as pressured, or in the springtime when you want more thump. In the springtime, I'm going to want more thump in certain scenarios because the fish are coming out from deeper water. A lot of times they're not as pressured out there. They come up there. You need something that has a lot of thump to it. They react to it. They bite it. They want something that's just drawing power. So that's what I'm going to be throwing this guy right here. I will crank it around rocks, but he's not going to. The DT Fat 3 runs about that 3 foot, 3.5, maximum 4 feet. Doesn't get super, super deep. So that's one thing. Next on the list was going to be, like I said, that Rocco number 5. He's more of my everyday square bill. He's the one I'm going to throw in the spring, but also all the way through the summertime into the wintertime. It's just a crankbait when they're in that shallower water. It's just, he's got a little bit more of a streamlined bill, which is going to make him to where he doesn't have a really wide wobble. He's going to have like sort of an in-between wobble, but he still has enough bill that I'm able to deflect off of those pieces of cover. Okay, if he gets any smaller, he's pretty much going to be if he gets, 20, 30, 40% smaller, he's going to be more of a square bill, and he's not going to deflect like a square bill, or he's going to be more like a flat side crankbait. He's not going to deflect like a square bill should, right? So that's where it's like a happy medium of figuring out. I mean, I haven't talked to super in depth on this bait, but I assume looking at it is he wanted it to be enough where it's going to deflect really well, but not too much where it's not still having. He wants that good medium, aggressive action. He has a good action, but not too much where it's going to be, over the top. two more crankbaits. Well, the last crankbait I have right here is the BX Brat. This is number 6 BX Brat. This is going to be a deeper diving selection. So each one of these, this is going to run 3 to 5. This one's going to about 2 to 4. This one's going to run about 6 feet. He's smaller in profile. So if you're in the fall or if you're looking to try to get a little bit more bites, a lot of times where the water's a little cleaner, that BX Brat, this is actually one of the deeper diving crankbaits that I have up here. This is going to run almost to 6 feet, okay? That's going to be a deeper diving crankbait. And that's a deeper diving square bill. And you can see he's got a pretty big size bill for the body he has, right? He's not really that big, but he's got a good size bill for that. So I'm going to use this a lot of times in the spring when I want to get a little bit deeper, or in the fall when the fish are down there. And it does deflect off the cover very well because overall, again, the bill is bigger. He's not as buoyant, so he's not as buoyant as this guy right here, but the bill is bigger than a traditional, than for the size of the bait. And then, of course, last but not least, being the speed trap. Ooh, sucker got rattles. And rattles can be your friend, and they can also scare them away, too. So you got to figure that out, too, as well. Typically, day in and day out, I prefer baits that have very little rattle. That's silent, 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 and then I got rattles. So a little bit different scenario here. You know, translucent color right here, more of your traditional shad color and shad pattern right here. But this bait actually is one of the OG square bills in its class. And it was sort of like before, like, just a little bit of history here. Before, like, a old school Lucky Craft 1.5 sort of got its, jump, really in the history of baits. This was sort of the original, like, subtle square bill. Because you realistically had, like, Bagley V2s, and you had, like, DT Fat 3s, and then you had, like, speed traps that were, like, he'd run, like, 6 foot deep, but even though he'd have a lot of rattles to him, he got down there, but his action wasn't super aggressive. He's actually super subtle, but he still deflected off of things. So it was one of the OG, probably one of the best square bills to really trend setting in the fishing industry. So that gave me a little history on that side of things. So that being said, those are the baits we have up here right now. They all have their own little attributes, and we're going to do a good test in the pool, but I'm going to talk a little bit about rods real quick here. And line size, first off, line size, what would you select? To me, my favorite square bill line size is 12-pound line. Okay, day in, day out, 12 is where it's at. I will go up to 14 or even 17 if I'm like, especially if I'm fishing super heavy cover around stumps and wood and all that stuff. 14 to 17 might be the move, but day in and day out when I'm cranking rocks, trying to get a little bit more depth, 12-pound line, 12-pound Subex Advanced Fluorocarbon is what I recommend. Not saying you can't throw 10. I'm just not as disciplined and always checking my line, because when you're cranking shallow, a lot of times you're cranking around rocks and wood and a lot of things you can get hung up on, and a lot of things that ultimately you can break off on, right? And lose that crankbait and lose that plug. So you're going to want to a lot of times be checking your line, checking your knots, making sure you don't have frays in your line. And 12 sort of seems to be the happy medium about getting the most depth out of your crankbait, but also having enough abrasion resistance to really be able to fish that bait at the right depths and be able to fish around the right stuff. So that being said, as far as rod selection, I'm going to just talk real quickly on this. I am not a big fan of a very wimpy crankbait rod. So if you go into your local academy or sporting goods store or tackle store, local tackle, small mom and pop, I'm not the guy who's going to say, I want that medium light, super light action rod. Now you can throw like a lighter action rod. You can throw a medium heavy action rod. You don't have to have a specific rod for this crankbait. But I do, if there is one thing that I recommend, I would say, I mean, you don't have to, but if I'm gonna crank a lot, I want to have a crankbait rod or something that I'm gonna be able to use. Lipless crankbaits, square bills, medium-sized crankbaits, something that I can throw multiple treble hook baits, even top waters. You can do a lot of things with a crankbait rod. You don't have to be locked into one thing. So that being said, on this rod, it's like a 7.3 medium cranking rod, but it's more like a medium heavy. It's a little bit heavier action cranking rod. This is like a Select Series rod, my Jacob Lewis Select Series rod. It's got a little bit more backbone, okay? So he's going to be like a really good trap slash, bigger square bills, 2.5 styles, bigger profiles like this one right here, that big Rocco. That's what I'm going to be throwing on this rod. He's going to probably be a little bit big for, maybe that BX Brat. But I could definitely throw like a Rocco on him, no problem. Absolutely no problem. But it just all depends on how they're eating the bait and what's really going on. But this is sort of like a bigger profile. Okay, so I'm going to go the opposite spectrum. Here's a Micromagic Pro. This is more of the medium power, but it's more like medium light to me. But this is like the lighter action of the rods I'm going to throw. You can see he's super wimpy. I mean, he's pretty wimpy for me. Like I like to pull on suckers. And so this one's not my favorite rod, but it's a rod that, like, if I'm throwing smaller square bills, like this guy right here, he's great for. Or flat size or stuff like that. Your 7.0 medium actions, I just do recommend staying away from medium light. Especially, okay, this is the reason why. If you're going to throw a medium light, you really limit the number of baits you can throw on that. And if you're a beginner and you're starting out, you don't want to start with medium light because, like, you can only throw like small crankbaits on it, and when you get too big of crankbaits, then you got to switch to something else. So if you only have limited tackle, I mean, like a heavier medium action like this one right here is going to give you more options to throw top waters on, throw lipless crankbaits on, small spinner baits. Like, you can throw a lot of different things and get away with it when it has a little bit more backbone to it than a medium light. So investment-wise, not big on the medium light side on a casting rod, period. Especially if you're limited. Now, if you're trying to get to be the next Rick Clunn and Ott the Foe and David Fritz, maybe you want to have a medium and a medium light and everything else, and that's fine. I completely understand that. If you're a big crankbait fisherman, you definitely would not. I'm not judging you in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so I have a rod coming. It's actually a 7.2 crankbait rod. That's the rod I would recommend the most. This is actually a 7.2 graphite composite, but the rod that I don't have yet. I have it, but I can't show you guys it yet. So I have one coming that's my favorite all-around crankbait rod. It's not too light, it's not too heavy. So sort of an in-between medium. 7.2, cast good, can roll cast, do all that stuff. This is a graphite composite, so this is like a little bit heavier action. He's actually on sale. It's a good rod. He's more of my all-around square bill rod as well, but he's gonna be a little bit on the heavier side. So you have a little bit of everything. Lighter crankbait rod, heavier crankbait rod. This is sort of an in-between, but it's a heavier feeling rod because it's a more graphite composite. It's almost like I'm getting real specific here, but basically it's just a rod with a material that's made from. It's heavier in feel, but it has the right action for getting the really good hook in the fish with treble hooks. Is basically just bringing that down a couple notches. So that is the rods. 12 to 14 pound line is what I would recommend. Try not to go any less than 12, probably. I mean, 10, you're just asking for it. So that being said, let's just do this. Let's grab these crankbaits. Let's walk up to the pool. Let's talk about retrieves and everything you need to know about crankbaits up there in these square bills, and we'll dive into it right now. Okay, guys, before we jump into actually making a cast, I will tell you a couple different things and a couple tips that will help you ultimately catch more fish. Now, I'm here with the family just hanging out, and I have this pool where I could basically show you exactly what I'm trying to do. First thing I will say is paralleling the bank and paralleling rock banks is really a key part of generating bites. So, like when I'm fishing around rock and I'm trying to make contact with the bottom as much as I possibly can, because that is when I deflect off of cover and off those rocks. That is typically when I'm going to generate the bite. So that is important. Also, the other thing is speed is your friend a lot of times. So as I cast this bait out here, and I'll just show you the rod, and as I'm reeling it, I'm reeling that crankbait and I'm bringing it pretty fast. Okay, that's an important part. I don't have to bring it really fast, but as I bring it down through there, I'm reeling him through there, reeling him through there, hits the bottom, boop, boop, cranking him. That is a key component in generating bites. All the best crankbait fishermen that I know, like when you're winding that crankbait down, you're trying to get it to depth, and you can see this bait out there on the bottom, he loses his action, deflect him off there. That is an important part of, and it is a very important part of crankbait fishing. The other thing that I will say, as you are cranking, just reeling the crankbait, it's not always the best move. Stopping and starting and imparting action is important as well. So as I slowly bring this crankbait down here, you sort of see As I get a little closer, you'll see that how wide a wobble that crankbait is. I'm starting it, stop, start. As you can see, as it deflects off of things, that is really a key component of getting those fish to generate that bite. And this is more of that bigger profile square bill that has a little bit more to him, has a bigger bill, so he's gonna deflect off that stuff a little bit better. Okay, so that is one thing. Let's drop over to the next little crankbait. I'm gonna pull up that OG Rocco. And so the one thing that you're gonna notice is like how the buoyancy of each bait. So when I cast this bait out there, I get him out there, you can see the little bit tighter wobble. I feel like just a little bit tighter wobble. And I get it down there, that's still very buoyant. Balsa crankbait, very buoyant. But the key is how that bait deflects off the bottom, even when I get down to the bottom. So you can see how that, now on a straight bottom, do you notice how that bait wants to continue to dive? He wants to dive down there, and that's really another really important part of it, okay, is I'm going down through there and I'm fishing sand. If I'm fishing a sand bottom, a lot of times the crankbait actually loses his action. He's just sort of hunting on the bottom, and then he comes up off there and he deflects off it. So think about it this way. If you don't feel your crankbait like really like hitting down there in the bottom, now of course it's a flat pool bottom. Typically you're gonna have any irregularities in the bottom, you're gonna have gravel and rocking, you're gonna have places for that crankbait to actually deflect off. But if it's a mud bottom, that is sort of what you're getting right there. You're getting a crankbait. That's why a lot of times in a muddy bottom situation, I'm throwing a lipless crankbait versus an actual diving crankbait, because I can impart action in that bait and I'm not gonna catch a lot of that muck on the bottom. I'm gonna be able to clear that crankbait a little bit easier. Again, the big key with these crankbaits is reeling, stop, start, stop, like as I'm sort of hitting the bottom. Now in this situation, I'm giving you a representation of that when the bait is not hitting the bottom, because I don't have the perfect pull with rocks on the bottom to show you guys exactly what it looks like. But stop, stop, deflect. The last thing that I will say is you're fishing cover, okay? It's called walking a crankbait over cover. So I have basically the pool net skimmer right here to show you sort of what I'm talking about. As you get closer to cover, when my crankbait gets there, my line will get on there and I'll feel it, boom, right there. Now, of course, this is a pole, so it's not gonna get easy to get hung up on. The biggest issue a lot of times I've had over the years is I get too impatient, and when I feel my line coming to a piece of cover, I don't slow my bait down a little bit, okay? So slowing your bait and walking your bait over cover is a key part of crankbait fishing. So when I feel that come there, I'm gonna stop, let it sort of deflect off, come over there and reel it on up. So if I can deflect it off there and I don't want to reel it too awful hard, imagine this is a piece of wood, I go ahead and I feel my line, because your front of your line is going to hit that piece of cover first, because especially if it's higher in the water column. And then that is when I slow down, I deflect off that piece of cover, let that bait float up a little bit, and then I keep cranking, and a lot of times that is when you're gonna get your bite. I'll do it one more time to show you guys. Crank down through here, I'm coming, boop. Keep it going. So that is all there is to it. There's a lot more about crankbait fishing that I could teach you guys today, but I'm not gonna show you everything in this video. We'll maybe do a really in-depth view and a master class on crankbaits here later in the season, but I wanted to give you an understanding of some of the things that might help you when you're trying to select the right rod, the right line, all that stuff. And I didn't really mention the fluorocarbon aspect. I think fluorocarbon and monofilament, you can go either way. Of course, the fluorocarbon, he sinks a little bit more, which can allow you to get a little bit more depth out of your bait. But you can go monofilament, which is a little bit on the cheaper side, and it is actually a little bit more abrasion resistant than most fluorocarbon. So you don't have to break the bank and throw fluorocarbon if that's not the way, if you're not trying to get more depth out of your crankbait. You can definitely choose a monofilament that'll work for you, and just go out there and have fun, man. Crankbait fishing is something that sort of started my love for bass fishing, and it's something that I've caught a ton of bass over the years on. Caught some of the biggest bass I've ever caught in my life on a crankbait. So you can have fun days out there on the water and generate a lot of bites, and it's just something that it takes a little bit of time. Every time you go out there, you learn something, a new retrieve, a new lure, a new color that you might not have known the last time, and that's what makes fishing fun. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video so much and learned a little bit along the way. We will see you on the next one.